one point, I learned that a river trip, a Norm Neville's river trip, he called it Mexican Hat Expeditions, in 1952, was going to be running Lava Falls on a certain day. I don't know how I found that out. But Esther and I had already taken the Toroweep Leap. That is where you step off the rim of the canyon and the whole side of the canyon starts moving with you as you go down to the bottom, to the river. And we had done that, and we had actually climbed out at that point by Lava Falls. Don't ever try it. It's horrible. But at least I knew the way down, and I decided to make a newspaper story out of it in the Los Angeles Times. And so I went over there, and a couple of ladies who had gone down the river with Mexican Hat Expeditions found out about it and wanted to go with me. So we drove over there to the Toroweep Overlook, as it's called, above Lava Falls, and we went down the so-called trail. There is no trail, but as one of the ladies said, from the moment we stepped off the rim, it was always a question of which would reach the river first, us or the topography, because everything moves when you move down that slide. So anyway, we got down there and I photographed what they did. They lined Lava Falls. They never ran it in those days. There was also a big cabin cruiser, a motorboat inboard, that was there being driven by Bob Rigg of the Rigg Brothers. And that boat ran Lava Falls. Their rowboats never did. They lined it. So that big boat ran Lava Falls, and I got movies of that and stills, and those pictures of that run appeared in the Los Angeles Times, along with the article about what they were doing. And that really got me acquainted with the river, because these people who ran the river with Neville's were about the only ones doing it. They would always have big barbecues afterward and show all their slides. And those barbecues would be out in the San Fernando Valley somewhere, be in the backyard at night, and they would show the slides, and everybody would show every picture he or she had taken on the entire river trip. So you sat out there all night eating and drinking and watching slides. And one of the people I met doing that, who had not been on the river at any time that I was associated with it, was P.T. Riley. And he got in touch with me by phone later, having met me there at this party, and wanted me to go down the river with him and row one of his boats that he was building out of fiberglass. And he knew I'd been on the crew rowing at UCLA, as if that would have had anything to do with skill on the river. It really wouldn't. But as a result of that, even though I couldn't row on the first trip because I had had a bad accident with a horse and dislocated my shoulder, my arm was strapped to my side for the entire trip, 21 days. So I couldn't row a boat on my first trip through the canyon. I was a passenger, and Esther went, she was a passenger, and there were a total, I think, of 9 people on that trip, taking these boats that P.T. Riley had made, which turned out to be not very good boats. And that started me. Maybe the second one, which was the first time I rowed the boat all the way through with Esther, but actually until we got into Dories, when we were no longer running those ridiculous little boats, we didn't have great river trips, because any trip in which you line a rapid and don't run it, it can't be really 100% great. We have to be able to handle all the rapids in the Grand Canyon, nothing from the shore. Everything happens on the river. The boat makes it through, and you hope you'll be right side up at the other end, and we usually are. Anyone who asks that question of what is special about a dory has obviously never gone through the Grand Canyon in a dory. A dory is a shape that belongs on the river. It started in the ocean, conquered the waves of the ocean, and now conquers the waves, the crashing water of almost any river. Dory is made for people to be in. It has the right shape, and in a Grand Canyon dory, you have the right places to put things, including yourself. The oarsman is accommodated as if the dory were made for him or her, and it just belongs. I could describe the shape of a dory, which is a rowboat. It doesn't have to be a rowboat. It could have a motor on it, but ours never did. A boat propelled by oars, 2 oars in the hands of a single oarsman, because the decisions that are made as to the strokes you take and how you do the rowing have to be unanimous. And the only way you get a unanimous decision is to have just one person making that decision. And the boatman, the oarsman, is responsible for what happens in the river because he is the one who is propelling and guiding the boat. They show their utility. They say to you, I belong on the big waves, and I'm stable, I'm sturdy, I'm wanting to go. And I respond to the oars beautifully. That's bragging in a way. And I'll go where you want me to go. And I'll carry what you want me to carry. And that's what the dory does, no matter how the water behaves. It's hard to know how a dory evolved into the shape that it is now, although you can say conditions caused that to happen. People wanted to go fishing in rough water in the Atlantic Ocean, Europeans. And gradually they developed boats that were more or less self-righting, certainly were stable, as stable as you can get in big waves, and that were easy to maneuver and easy to row and would move with pretty good speed. And gradually you came into the shape of what we call the dory. And we say the best representation of that was in Portugal, in the ocean, fishing boats. Gradually that went west into the United States, and we had fishing boats in New England that were similar, self-righting almost, very stable, easy to row. They moved readily when they were asked to. And so we got an Indian name somehow, and I don't know the evolution of the name of the dory exactly, but they say it's an adaptation of an American Indian word Dory from the Caribbean Sea. D-U-R-I, it's usually spelled. Then it became Dory in New England, and of course many, many fishing boats in New England are dories, rowed with oars. Some are motored, of course, out into the ocean. And when they moved west, we called them dories eventually, but they were first called drift boats, mostly in Oregon, where there are lots of runnable rivers, and they were used for fishing, floating with the current of the river. In any case, such as, say, the Rogue River or the Mackenzie. And we ended up with a boat very similar, though not as big, as a Grand Canyon Dory. The Grand Canyon Dory has to be bigger because it has to carry people through the canyon, not just 1 or 2 fishermen, carry passengers, and also it has to be able to carry a load. It has to haul all of the equipment and all the supplies that are going to be needed on a trip of 2 or 3 weeks through the Grand Canyon, which is going to take time, obviously. And 2 or 3 weeks going through the Grand Canyon, you need a hefty amount of supplies. So you put them in a dory, and once you close up the hatches, you hardly know they're there. It just runs beautifully. The word got around somehow that I had other things to do, and Grand Canyon Dories was doing all right, and that someone else could be owning it and managing it, and yet I wasn't willing to let it go just as a river running company and go into some other hands in which it would be run differently. Things were going on in my life that demanded my attention and my presence more. And I didn't really want to stop what I was doing there, but the Grand Canyon, owning the Grand Canyon Dories was just too much fun. I couldn't be having fun all the time. You know, you're not supposed to be happy in this world. And so I was ready to give up something that had made me very happy and which I enjoyed greatly. And one of the conditions of the sale was that it would always be Dories and it would always be O.A.R powered. And they would run the trips the way we had run them. And George happily signed up for that. There wasn't a great deal of money involved. It could have gone higher if I had accepted some of the propositions I had from others. But George was the one I had faith in to do it right. He was doing it right with his O.A.R powered trips anyway. He just needed a little bit of an upgrade, and that upgrade would be Dories. It said it on his license plate, "We row." And that meant that he was an advocate for rowing. So that gave him a pretty good place in my heart as one of those who wanted Grand Canyon Dories, who wanted to buy Grand Canyon Dories. The obvious, most important issue is numbers of people. The earth is already terribly overcrowded, and overcrowding causes people to move around. And in our case, it causes people to move from Mexico to California. And we're overcrowded. It's the most important issue on the earth. Movements of people and growing numbers of people. I wish I had accomplished some things in conservation that I did not. We could have stopped Grand Canyon Dam, and we didn't. And we didn't try hard enough. We tried very hard in Grand Canyon dams and even harder in the Dinosaur National Monument dams. Those were our first big issue, and we beat them. And those were said to be necessary for the development of the West. Well, we didn't get them built, and we fought against them, and they turned out to be unnecessary. What comes into my head immediately, and if I were to think longer, I might find more, but a great book, which, as far as the rivers are concerned, especially the Colorado River, is Time and the River Flowing by Francois Lédet, one of the greatest writers in history, who had a few problems that he couldn't overcome, but when he did sit down and write a book, it was a masterpiece. And the amount of work that went into that is not only amazing, but the result is amazing. Time and the River Flowing, Grand Canyon by Francois Lédet. Another one that he did was called The Last Redwoods, about saving the redwoods. And as a result of that book, more than any other thing, we obtained Redwood National Park. what's heroic about having a good time? That's what you're doing when you're in the Grand Canyon. And maybe not every minute. I mean, if you end up out of the boat and in the water, and the boat's upside down, you don't feel heroic at that time. And certainly included David Brower, who was the greatest conservationist of all time. Well, that doesn't limit him to the Grand Canyon, though. I'm speaking of worldwide events. Dave Wegner. Dave Wegner worked for the Bureau of Reclamation, and his job was to persuade the river runners and other conservationists that there could be dams in the Grand Canyon damming up the Colorado River in a way that would be acceptable. We said, no, it will never be acceptable to put any dams in the Grand Canyon. And gradually, this guy from the Bureau of Reclamation, who was trying to persuade us to accept dams in the Grand Canyon, came around to our side of the issue. And he became a conservationist. And he brought the Bureau of Reclamation around in a way, and he himself more or less would not let them do what they wanted to do. As a result of that, partly, we didn't get the dams. Dave Wegner stayed with the government. He's involved in conservation in the government now. He's in Washington, D.C. He has a very responsible position. And the Bureau of Reclamation, as you know, doesn't have any more ambitions about dams in the Grand Canyon, partly because we, as a group of people, talked Dave Wegner out of the idea. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, quite so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats.